segment of Frankly Franklin. My name is Mary Lou Matthews, and my guest this afternoon is Bob Byrum, who's here to share with us some of his experiences from World War II. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I've always been real interested in Iwo Jima, and I think you have some stories that you can tell us about Iwo Jima. Now, tell us first of all, you went into the Marines, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And how old were you, just out of curiosity?
I was 18.
18. Now, were you drafted or did you volunteer?
Well, I was drafted for the Navy, but I volunteered for the Marine Corps.
So they let you in the Marines instead?
Yes.
Why did you want to go into the Marines?
Well, I really don't know. They needed, I think at the time they said they needed 5 men for the Marine Corps, and I said, well, good. I said, I'll just try that. You know, of course I was young and reckless and restless too, I guess. So.
Now, what year did you go into the Marines?
March of 1944.
So you went in, what, 3 years then after Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And did you go straight to Iwo Jima?
No.
Or after, I know there was boot camp and that, but what did you do before you got to Iwo Jima then?
Oh, well, a lot. There, of course, we went to boot camp. I went to boot camp in San Diego. And then from there, we had some extensive training at Camp Pendleton. And then from there, that was in March, April, and May. And then in June, they shipped us out to join the 4th Marine Division on Maui in the Hawaiian Islands.
Now, for a lot of people who might be listening, they may be sitting there thinking, ooh, Maui, that sounds like a pretty good post. What was Maui like in 1944?
Just like it is right now, I guess. I haven't been over there. But I did go to Hawaii, but I didn't make it over to Maui.
Oh, I thought you said you went to Maui. I'm sorry.
No, not since the war.
But you were shipped from the United States to Maui.
To Maui, yes.
And did you undergo further training there in Maui?
Oh yes, that was our home base. We trained there.
And did you know what they were preparing you for?
No. They were just continuous training every day. And it was just like a job. It's a routine. Every day you would go through the same situation.
When did you find out but then you found out you were going into combat?
We knew that was, well, we didn't know where we were going. I mean, you just knew you were going someplace. And of course, the 4th Marine Division had already been on Roy Namur and Saipan and Tinian. In fact, the 4th Marine Division, and of course I wasn't old enough at the time to get with it when it was first formed. But when it was formed, it's the only organization, I believe, if I'm correct, that made 4 landings, 4 beachheads, in 13 months. And that was Roy Namur, Saipan, Tinian, and Iwo Jima.
Why don't we kind of show the audience, in case their geography is rickety, we might show them exactly where you're talking about.
Well, right here is Maui in the Hawaiian Islands. And then, of course, right over here is Iwo Jima. But, I mean, not there, but this is, I can't see.
This is Roy Namur.
That's Roy Namur, okay. That was the first operation that the 4th Marine Division made, and as a unit. Now, there had been, the 4th Marine Division was formed by taking parts of other divisions and putting them all together and making a unit. But, of course, there were a lot of men in the 4th Marine Division that had been in combat before, like in Guadalcanal and Solomon Islands, Guam and places like that.
We might remind the audience that's listening that what the Americans were trying to do was to push the Japanese off these islands kind of one by one, with the idea of maybe invading Japan, which was right up in here.
That's correct.
Okay, so there was Roy Namur that you mentioned, and why don't you point out Saipan and Tinian?
Well, right here, Saipan and Tinian, there are 2 large islands. In fact, Saipan had a large airstrip on it. And they needed that desperately because that's where the Japanese were operating from with all their air wings. And they were intercepting our bombers. As we were flying across there to bomb Japan, and they were intercepting our bombers.
So it was important for the Americans to get control of Saipan.
They had to have Saipan because that was a refueling base. And also that was where we needed to station some airplanes.
And let's point out, just so the audience will know, that here is Iwo Jima.
Right.
And it's real funny to me when you look on a large world map, Iwo Jima is just a little bitty dot out there. Very small island, wasn't it? We
called it Pork Chop Island. Actually, if you can see a better view of it someplace, it is like a pork chop. It's only 5 miles long and 3 miles wide. And 8 square miles.
8 square miles. And I understand that the composition of the island was unusual, that it was volcanic ash. Why don't you kind of describe it for us?
Well, you know, you think of a beach as being white sand, pretty and all that. This was black, jet black, from volcanic ash. That was, in fact, Mount Suribachi was an active volcano. Smoke was rolling out of it. And
we might again remind the audience that Mount Suribachi was it in the center of the island?
No, it was on the southern end of the island.
Okay.
And that's where the boys from the 5th Marine Division took that hill, and that's where they raised the flag.
Why don't we pull out the picture there that we had a minute ago, just in case. I think most people have probably seen the picture of the flag being raised on Iwo Jima. Don't you think it's one of the most famous photographs ever?
Yes, I think it's actually it's a symbol. It stands for all the service personnel anywhere, not just the Marine Corps or the 4th, 3rd, 4th, 5th Marine Divisions, but for everyone.
And for those people who've been to Washington, D.C., this is the Marine Memorial at Washington has this. So the flag was raised on Mount Suribachi, but the rest of the island was volcanic ash?
All of it was volcanic ash, yes. In fact, the 4th Marine Division landed in the 5th Marine landed on the southern tip of the island. The 4th Marine Division landed in the center, and the 3rd Marine Division on our right, which was up toward the northern end of the island. And we were to take the first airstrip, move across the first airstrip, and that was supposed to have been done the second day. But it took us 5 days to get to the second airstrip.
And I think you told me earlier it took 35 or 36 days to secure the island?
36 days.
36 days. And they had planned for you to do it in?
Well, they didn't know. We thought we could just move in there. But
now, were the Japanese on top of Mount Suribachi?
They were dug in. You didn't see any of them. That was a honeycomb, not just that part of the island, but the entire island. Everywhere there was a rock or cave, anywhere up in the northern section of the island, that the whole island was just honeycombed. And it had machine gun emplacements, had artillery back in these caves. You couldn't get to them. They bombed Iwo, bombed and strafed it for 72 consecutive days before we landed. The Navy bombarded it. And when we landed, man, it's just like you'd never hit it with anything.
Is that right?
Because they were back in these caves, down in these hills, and there was no way to get to them.
What was it like trying to get on that beach?
Well, it was volcanic sand, black volcanic ash is what it was made out of. It was loose. You'd sink down halfway to your knees. And did you ever try to walk uphill in snow? Well, that was it. And it was bad. You couldn't, we couldn't get any tanks in there. The tanks couldn't operate. Couldn't get any half tracks. Couldn't get trucks in there, or things like that. So it was all done by foot until we got far enough ahead where we could eventually come in and bring some of these supplies.
And I guess that's why the casualties were so high. You and I were talking earlier that it's the bloodiest single day of fighting, or is it the bloodiest battle in World War II?
Yes, I suppose it was, Mary Lou. We had about 6,800 men killed on that island. It's only 8 square miles. And we had 19 wounded. There was 21,000 Japanese killed. And that's how many were on the island. No prisoner. Well, I say no prisoners. There were very few prisoners taken. Maybe a few hundred, maybe. That right at the last surrendered. But they don't give up.
Do you think the casualties were so high because you were having to do all of that by the infantry was having to establish itself?
Oh yes, it was. Well, it was just plain old hand to hand. You know, we couldn't get any tank support until after we got across the first airstrip, and without tank support, and of course we had our artillery set up on the beach. We had an Army artillery unit sitting up on the beach there, and they gave us a lot of support, but they couldn't follow us because of the volcanic ash and sand. It was so bad. And eventually we got, you could get these vehicles in if you had time. So as we progressed and we took more of the island, like a couple of miles up, then we could get these vehicles in, like the Jeeps that had the rockets on it, and we get those up behind our lines.
Do you have any idea how far you were advancing a day?
Well, it took us, the first airstrip was about 600 yards from the beach. Well, it took us all day, that day, and part of the next day to get across the first airstrip. We had so many casualties that we had to keep getting replacements in. And then from there until to the next airstrip was possibly, I can't recall. It's, time erases some of these things, but it was probably maybe a half to 3/4 of a mile to the next airstrip. They had 2 airstrips on there. And it took us a couple of days, well into the second day and possibly the third day to reach the second airstrip. And then after we crossed that, that's when the resistance was really bad for us. Of course, all that time, during that time, the 5th Marine Division was trying to take Mount Suribachi, and it was honeycombed. I mean, it was, there's no way to describe it without you could see it. They were back in there by the thousands. I mean, when you have 21,000 troops underground someplace, it has to be nothing but just a pure honeycomb island.
And so the 5th Marine Division was having to fight its way up
on Mount Suribachi and take that section of it, of the island, to get that secured. They had to, of course, once they took it, they had to go across and to the other side. You just don't take part of it and quit.
Right. And I think you told us earlier you saw the flag going up. Is that right?
Oh yes. I guess everyone did that was within sight. We had gone to, it was the 5th day, I believe it was, when they raised the flag. They had gotten to the top of the summit of the Mount Suribachi. And of course it was still an active volcano. The smoke was just boiling out of it. And the boys from the 5th Marine Division got to the top of it and raised the flag. Well, in the meantime, that was on the morning, I think it was, of the 5th. In the meantime, the night before, on the 4th day, we'd lost so many casualties, we were replaced, our company, Company F, Company 2nd Battalion, 24th. We had a company to come in and replace us overnight, and we went back to regroup, and we were probably back maybe a half a mile from Suribachi. And I remember I was sitting there in the foxhole we had dug, and Towson and I had dug in together in the foxhole, and somebody said, "There she goes," and we turned and looked, and the flag was going up. They just raising it up at that time.
Do you remember what the reaction was?
Oh man, yeah, I'm telling you, it sounded like a football game.
Is that
You never
right?
heard as many people cheering in your life.
So it must have been a real morale booster to see
Oh,
that
yes,
American flag
yes.
go up, even though you knew the island wasn't secured. That it.
No, we still had a lot of rough days ahead of us.
But now I think you were telling us earlier, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, that the first raising was just a temporary raising.
That was just a temporary. They found a piece of conduit or a pipe or something that was real short, and they wanted to get that flag up, so they did on that one. And then it was sometime later after that that they found a larger piece of pipe or something, and they put it up where it would be secure this time.
Mm-hmm. And I think you told me earlier that you all were determined that that flag wasn't going to come down.
That's right. We didn't. That flag wasn't coming down.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever feel like in the middle of the battle that you all weren't going to take the island, or
No,
were you?
we had to take it, Mary Lou. There was no place to go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, all you had behind you was ocean. You couldn't swim back to Hawaii.
So there was no way to pull you out of there, though.
No way to get out. I mean, you had to stay there. You had to take it.
And so there was never any thought of retreat or surrender?
No.
Even as bad as the fighting must have gotten. How hot was it?
It was hot in the daytime. It would get probably, maybe in the low 80s at the time. And at night it would cool off. And of course, as I told you before, it was a volcanic island.
Mm-hmm.
It was the whole island was really, it was formed from a volcano. And the eruption, that's what they call it, the Volcano Islands there. The Bonin Islands is part of the Bonin group. And I remember one night we were about after we crossed the second airstrip and got to Hill 382, which was probably one of the bloodiest places that, as far as fighting went, that you could be at that time. We got to Hill 382, and the first night, Donald Towson and I'll tell you about Donald in a minute. Donald Towson and I dug in, and when we dug foxholes, we didn't dig a big hole. We dug a hole just big enough to get two people in, like this, like maybe 3 feet across. But we dig it this deep, waist deep or better. And that was to keep mortar shells from falling into your hole, you know, dropping right directly in on it. And of course, the bigger the hole, the more chance you had of catching a direct hit. So Donald and I dug in one night, and we'd gotten down about knee deep, I guess, and it was hard. It was, after we got through the sand and stuff, there was rocks. On Hill 382, it was kind of like the knobs over at Auburn and Russellville, you know. So we were digging in. All at once, steam started coming up out of that hole. It was hot, and it was cooling off. It was right at dark, see, and it was beginning to cool off. And the further we would dig, the hotter it would get. And I said, Donald, we're going to blow up. But anyway, the steam was coming up out of the holes. And, of course, everyone had the same situation as we did. But we got down about knee deep, or maybe a thigh deep or something, and I hit a rock. And I said, oh, man, this is it. So we dug out, and there's a rock about this big. Well, I started to get that rock. It was hot. It was so hot you couldn't touch it. So I dug down around that rock and got my poncho and folded it and raised the rock up and got it and then threw it out of the hole. And steam was just rolling out of that hole that night. So then we went ahead and we dug our hole on down about like that, but it was still so hot in the bottom of the hole that you couldn't stand in there. And we'd lay on the edge of the hole, and then if we had a mortar attack or artillery or something like that, we just roll over in it, see.
Mm-hmm.
But I doubled my poncho, which is about that thick, and put it in the bottom of it so I could stand on it.
My kids in class, when I talk about digging foxholes and stuff, they always say, well, what did they dig them with?
We dug them with a little old shovel about this long and a little pick about that long.
That was a task then, to dig a big, deep foxhole with a little bitty pick and shovel.
Man, did you ever see a dog dig a bone out of a hole? Buddy, at times you can dig like that.
Well, tell us about your friend that you mentioned here.
Oh, Donald. Donald's from Baltimore, and great guy, one of the finest. In fact, I just got a Christmas card from him yesterday. And I was wounded on the 15th day and evacuated.
Well, I was going to ask you later if you were wounded.
Yeah, I was wounded in the leg, and I was evacuated. And Donald hadn't gotten hit so far. Everyone just about had been wounded, and they had gotten probably patched up and stayed with it. But I couldn't walk, so I tried to stay there, but I couldn't walk. And Captain Riddland said, "Hey, Byrum," says, "we're going to get you on a stretcher and get you out of here." So, which I was lucky and very fortunate. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Donald, on 2 days before the island was secured, I think it was on the 34th day, they declared the island secured on the 36th day. When they're getting ready to walk off the island, Donald had dug him a little hole. Fighting had really died down. It just, sporadic. And Donald had dug him a long hole, just something he could get in and kind of relax in case something came his way, he could fall over in it. He was sitting in that hole, and they had I suppose it was just a small Japanese knee mortar or something, and they fired that thing up, and they go right up in the air. They could fire them right straight up and they'll come down. And that thing went up in the air and came down and landed in that hole and blew his leg off.
Oh.
He lost a leg.
Mm-hmm.
But that guy's amazing, though.
Mm-hmm.
He was at a reunion this last May in Louisville. He doesn't care. He's got that artificial leg. He wears shorts. He gets out and runs. He goes swimming,
Now, I think you said that you go to all the reunions, and sometimes you go a couple of times a year.
Right. We have a reunion. We have a division reunion, which is the national reunion of the entire division, mm-hmm. 4th Marine Division. And then we have an Iwo Jima Veterans Reunion, and we have that somewhere in the South every year. Now, they do have different Iwo Jima reunions in different parts of the country, but the one that I go to is always down south somewhere because mm-hmm. of the warm weather. And then we have a company reunion every year, which is probably 25 or 30 of us. Mm-hmm. That's the best one.
I guess you don't tell any old war stories over and over, do you?
Oh, man, that's all we do is rehash.
Mm-hmm. So you have 25 or 30
right.
who are out of how many were in your company?
Well, originally, the original company was 240, but probably with replacements and everything. We had some replacements that came in, and we didn't know them until we started going to the reunions mm-hmm. because they would come in 30 minutes, they'd be gone again mm-hmm. because they'd gotten hit,
And what did you tell us earlier? How many of your company survived Iwo Jima?
Either 32 or 34 of us that came back from
mm-hmm.
that. But practically every one of those had been wounded.
Mm-hmm.
The one instance that I remember, there was a boy from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which was a good friend of mine. His name was Jerry Buck, J.J. Buck. Jerry Jerome Buck was his name. Buck was 17 years old. He turned 18 2 days before we landed on Iwo. He turned, on the 17th of February 1944, he turned 18 years of age. 5 days later, he got killed.
When I was talking to Bill Eldred, and that's one of the things we talked about was how young mm-hmm. Everybody was and how sad that was.
You grow up in a hurry, Mary Lou.
I bet you do, yeah. After you were wounded, you went back to...
I left there, went aboard a hospital ship, and stayed there 2 days until they got it full of wounded. And then we went to Saipan. They had tents set up, hospital tents set up there, and big, huge, like these great big tents like Lane has, at auctions, and they huge tents. Mm-hmm. And had several of those set up side by side. There were so many wounded in there that they had just these regular cots, canvas cots, and they were so thick in these tents that we'd have to crawl over 2 or 3 bunks to get out, and had a little aisleway to get out to kind of walk a little bit, maneuver a little bit, drag your crutches across there.
So how long were you there?
I was there about 3 weeks, and then I went from there. They shipped me to Honolulu, to the Naval Hospital there at Honolulu, and I stayed there probably I don't know, I think around 6 to 8 weeks, and then they finally shipped me back to my outfit.
And where was your outfit then?
I was back on Maui, what was left there. There was probably 20 or 25 of them there. We were waiting on replacements to come in to rebuild the company.
So this must have been early 45 by now?
Right, this is, that was, let's see, February and March, we secured it in March, April, May, and it's probably June.
Now, did you think that you were going to have to go back into combat? Did your
Well, yes, we had already begun to get the replacements in, and we were back in training again, and we were all getting ready to hit the Japanese mainland. We knew that was the only place to go.
So you thought you might be in that invasion force. How did you feel when you heard about the atomic bomb? It's so controversial today.
Relieved, relieved. In fact, if that bomb had not been dropped, there's no telling how many hundreds of thousands of American troops, I'm talking about Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, all would have lost their lives there in Japan.
So there was a great sense of relief.
Right.
And, you know, Truman said he never lost a minute's sleep over it. He knew it was American lives. And
he's one of the greatest presidents we ever had.
So you never end up having to go in an invasion force. What did you do next?
All right, then they deactivated the 4th Marine Division. And it was the first Marine Division to be deactivated and sent back to the United States. And those people, the men there that had been in the longest, got to go home first. The rest of us had to go elsewhere until some of the older men in the other divisions got back home. So they sent me to Okinawa in a military police unit to help mop up and take prisoners and things like that. Because in the meantime, after Iwo, Okinawa was invaded and was taken, and it was a nice island, a big island. It was like 90 miles long and 45 miles wide in its widest point. And it was an educated island. It had 2 colleges on it, and at the time, but there was nothing left. When we got there, where they had invaded the island, the colleges were demolished. Shuri Castle was demolished. It was just rubble. I mean, you could shut your eyes and walk through Shuri Castle and never hit a wall, you know.
Do you remember where you were when, I guess, Truman announced that the Japanese had surrendered?
Yeah, I was on Maui.
And your reactions? I mean, there just had to be euphoria. I've seen all the pictures in the magazines.
Well, undoubtedly, we all headed for the slop chute, the beer joint.
The beer joints. You wanted to celebrate, huh?
So we did, yes.
Is there anything, our time's about to run out here, is there anything that you'd like to add about your experiences in the war or your experiences there on Iwo Jima?
I'll tell you one thing. Jim Westbrook, we're still close. Those of us that's in F Company, we're like brothers. My telephone bill will run $100 a month talking to them.
There must be incredible camaraderie between men you fought with.
You can't believe it. We're closer than family. I'd never been in combat before. Jim Westbrook had been on Roy and the Moore in Saipan, and he was a radio operator. And I was the 3rd man out of the Higgins boat when they dropped that ramp. In fact, the coxswain of the boat told us that if you guys will hang on, if there's any way, you'll never get your feet wet. We didn't have to wade in. He gunned that boat, and when he hit that beach, he ran up on it and dropped that ramp, and we hit it on sand. And here I went out of that boat, and Jim was right behind me. And the first thing, of course, I saw was dead men laying everywhere. And being young, being the first time in combat, I just dropped on my knee to get my breath, and boy, Jim Westbrook came by me like a bullet and grabbed me in the seat of the pants and said, "Get thee off this beach." And he dragged me about 30 feet or so, and we both fell in this bomb crater. And if it hadn't been for that, I'd have probably still been on that beach.
It was that horrible a scene then when you hit it.
So, they threw everything at, you talking about the kitchen sink, they had the kitchen sink.
And this gentleman is still alive, and you still talk with him.
In fact, we talk to each other at least every 2 weeks, and we visit back and forth. We have friends in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and up in Baltimore, Oklahoma, everywhere. Just all over the United States.
Well, I know your experiences there were something that maybe you think I'd like to avoid doing that, but do you think it changed you and shaped you as a person in any way?
Well, I think the Marine Corps did. One thing the Marine Corps does, it teaches you discipline, it teaches you self-respect, it teaches you honor, it teaches you love. Now, believe it or not. And it also, and a lot of people may not believe this, but it also teaches you respect for God. They want you to be a religious person. They want you to stay in close contact with your family as much as you can. And, of course, love one another. Because, man, your life depends on your next man, your friend right there.
I guess you weren't married yet, were you?
No.
Because you said you were just 18 when you went.
That's the furthest thing from my mind.
Had you gone in just right out of high school?
Yes.
So you were just right out of high school when you went in. Well, I appreciate you coming. Go ahead.
I was just a little boy.
I know when I think about people being 17 and 18, and I said the same thing to Bill Eldred, and doing this sort of stuff, it's just amazing. And I guess if you weren't mature, you got mature really fast.
You mature enough.
Well, I appreciate you coming and chatting with us this afternoon, and I guess if anybody wants to talk to you more about Iwo Jima, you're available.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for